23 times Radio Breakfast. History has repeated itself when protesters targeted the Rokeby Venus in the National Gallery as suffragettes slashed the Velázquez masterpiece in 1914. Now, two Just Stop Oil protesters have smashed the glass protecting the painting. It got attention, but did it change anyone's minds? Dr. Grahame Buss is former principal scientist for Shell and a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. Morning to Grahame.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
Are you pleased with this publicity? Then this has happened. They've stood in front of the painting. Are you pleased with that?
Oh, it's not about being pleased, is it? It's about bringing about change. I'm glad you mentioned the painting. Do you know what Suella Braverman said at Portsmouth High School? Always remember the suffragettes who gave me the right to vote. Now, that's why we broke the glass on that painting, because we're trying to draw that analogy between what we're trying to bring, the changes we're trying to bring, and the changes that were brought by the suffragettes.
But the suffragettes were campaigning to have a vote to alter the political process. You've got the vote. You can vote in politicians. We can all vote in politicians that do the people's will when it comes to affecting climate change. That's a gift that we all have. That's surely a crucial distinction between you and the suffragettes.
I think to understand why we do what we do, we have to just recognise why we're doing this. We have, this country and most countries around the world have failed to act appropriately, have failed to do enough to address the climate crisis. It was climate change and now it's a climate crisis, and soon it'll be a climate catastrophe. And we're seeing that already. And we know that we're not making the changes quickly enough. David Attenborough said, we cannot be radical enough. A bastion of friend of the royal family, isn't he? So you have to recognise that the government is not doing its duty, and because it's not doing its duty, we have to bring this to the attention of the public, and we have to change the government's.
But you know the argument here, Grahame, that many people listening will be saying, climate catastrophe, yes. We want change. We want change. There's an election coming up. We will be able to articulate our views at the ballot box. But simply attacking a painting, simply gluing yourself to a road, it just annoys people. And although you might get publicity, which is good, I'm not sure all publicity is good publicity because it carries with it a connotation of annoying people. And I just wonder whether that damages the cause that you espouse so fervently.
Interesting observation, but of course that's exactly what happened to the suffragettes. The suffragettes were not particularly popular at the time, and yet they brought about that change. We're not doing this to be popular. We're doing this to bring about change. I mean, look what we're seeing already in the UK. We're seeing very, very serious flooding, and we had very serious forest fires last year. The fire service has said they don't have the resources to put out the forest fires they're going to see in the future. And if you look what happened in Chesterfield, for example, where the Environment Agency had built lots of flood defences, but it didn't work. Yeah. The water just came up through people's toilets and flooded their ground floors with water and sewage. Yeah. People wading through the ground floor through sewage, listening to their furniture crashing around in the waves.
I think people are. I think that's a fair. People are conscious of the reality of this. Just before you go,
we're not acting, are we?
Well, that's true. But the people who can act are the government, and we have a chance to vote in governments every 5 years. That's how democracy works. There's a lot of talk about protests at the minute, Grahame. There's a lot of talk at the minute about protests around Remembrance Sunday, Armistice Day, the Cenotaph. Would you ever want to disrupt something like a Remembrance Day event in order, because you'd get a hell of a lot of publicity. You would get a hell of a lot of publicity if Just Stop Oil popped up on Remembrance Sunday. Would you ever do that?
Are you referring yesterday?
No, I'm not talking about. I know there's a dispute about whether you did or didn't. I'm not interested in that. I'm asking the question. Would you?
We were stopped by the police at the Senate.
Yeah. But would you? So my question, prompted by thinking about this, is: would you ever disrupt something like Remembrance Sunday for the publicity?
Our position is non-violent civil resistance.
I understand that, but that's what we do. But a very specific question. I
can't answer your question because
why not? Because you're thinking about doing it.
No. I don't know. Well, all I can say is that our actions are always non-violent.
I understand, but you might do it. When I say that, so you're not disgusted by the thought. You're like, well, maybe we might end up doing that.
that I have no idea as to whether that would happen, but I think it's extremely unlikely because exactly for the reasons you've just described.
Okay.
But you have to recognize that what we are going to see is going to destroy people's lives. You know, here we are remembering the dead. We need to remember the living.
I understand that. I understand
and
that.
our living are our children and people overseas who are already refugees rising from the climate crisis.
Okay. Grahame, I
it's
understand.
so important to take these actions.
Grahame Buss, thank you for joining us today. That's Dr. Grahame Buss, the former principal scientist for Shell and a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. He thinks it's unlikely but couldn't quite rule out action on Remembrance Sunday.
It's now 7:28.